Robert, a few days in, how is this counteroffensive going?
Haven't a clue. And that's the point. For the first time, both sides, but particularly Zelenkyy and Kiev, have maintained what is known as a degree of operational security, OPSEC, keeping quiet about vital details of the deployment, the plan, and how far they've got. It is very, very tough indeed what they've taken on, and there have even been questions about it, I understand, within the Ukrainian military staff. It is very high risk. Right. That's why we won't get an outcome for 3 or 4 days.
Questions as in, have they the capability to do it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think superficially they have to do the initial attack, but the whole point for this very difficult kind of warfare that they're in at the moment is that they need reserves, both tactical reserves, that is, things on the spot that you can bring in to plug the gaps, and a strategic reserve is that if the thing really slows down and goes wrong, that you can bring in almost another small army group, a division, 2 or 3 brigades. Yes. in NATO terms. And there are great questions about that because largely, as a modern army, the Ukrainian army is a work in progress.
Yeah. They obviously could only be able to think about this if they are supplied correctly. And obviously the West is making arms, information, manpower available to them.
Not manpower, advice. I think advice at one remove. I think what is interesting is the information war, that I think that they are seeing a lot, that they're knowing a lot. But it's the timing of this which is so interesting, which isn't military, it's political. Zelenskyy did it for one very good reason. He thinks if we don't do things, if we don't show a win, then support from Europe, particularly EU Europe, is going to fall away, and we're seeing signs of that already. There's also a fear that Russia would try and leap ahead and organize 2 of these phony referendums, not only in Kherson, but in Zaporizhia Oblast. That would be both an advantage and a terrible problem for Putin, yes, because the likelihood is that it would have to be grabbed as Russian territory. And of course, we're thinking of Putin today very much as the absolute reverse, obverse, negative to positive of Mikhail Gorbachev.
Oh, the irony doesn't go unnoticed in all of this. I mean, Gorbachev was everything that Putin would detest, really.
And Putin has been open in his detestation of Gorbachev and his successor, Boris Yeltsin, but more particularly Gorbachev. And what is Gorbachev? I know you've had lots of people paying tribute to him, but in what we're talking about now, the great achievement of Gorbachev was to get the Russians out of Eastern Europe without violence, peacefully, wholly peacefully. What is Putin doing? Moving into Eastern Europe with extreme violence.
Yeah. I just thought the irony I was reading in terms of the tributes that Putin said that he would be writing a letter to Mr. Gorbachev's family in praise of him. I'm sure that will be quite a short letter.
I think it would be very brief indeed, because he's been absolutely open, because he thinks that Gorbachev particularly, but also Yeltsin, betrayed the whole tradition of the great empire of the Soviet Union, about which Putin is almost irrationally sentimental. And that's the problem, because the people who, it's going very strong in Europe, the movement who are saying, let's cut a deal, let's get cheap gas, come on, you know, all wars have to come to an end with a deal. Because of this vision of Russia, it is very difficult to know what deal you can make with Putin now.
It's very interesting that you bring this up. We were talking about this earlier in the programme as well, as we hit winter, as we get the predictions of inflation at 22% for next year, and yet you will have these appeasers within Europe saying, let's cut a deal. Now, a lot of people may say, very, very good idea, but that obviously puts pressure on a country like the United Kingdom, really, who's there and saying, we are behind Ukraine the whole way, because that just may not be the case with the rest of Europe.
Not entirely the rest of Europe, because this is where Eastern Europe within the club,
yes,
whether it's the EU and particularly NATO, are absolutely with the Brits.
Oh, what about Germany?
Germany is the real problem.
Yeah.
Germany is the real problem because Eamon, there are signs that Germany in that coalition obviously is very divided, and within the ministries, that the German foreign ministry takes a very hard line with Putin because they're so familiar with his ways. Interestingly, with a Green foreign minister, Mrs. Baerbock, and the defence ministry, which is not very well organised and is very weak, really says we can't be helping overmuch. It's quite a problem, and Scholz himself has got the legacy of his great mentor, Gerhard Schröder, who cut short his term as Chancellor to go and work for guess who? The Russian gas industry.
Gosh. So what pressure does that put on Britain, then, really, to cut a deal?
I think Britain's under another kind of pressure. Britain, I think, may well say that may well be a chorus, and we're hearing it from the fringes. We had General Dannett, former head of the army, who is probably less informed than you and I, and I'm being not only snide but actually accurate about what is really going on behind this, saying, oh, you always have to cut a deal, save lives. This is not available because nobody is in a position to offer a deal, whether it's Zelensky, he's going to go down fighting, or Putin. What Britain is doing is advising and learning about training, but it's learning about training for what it's got to do with its own army. The army has got to be brought up to date, and there's a very interesting debate going on with our own Ministry of Defence saying, this is the kind of warfare we're going to have to face in the future. That all the things we've talked about, the mixture of hybrid, of information, of digital, and fighting on the ground in very, very difficult circumstances. We have got to learn all over again. Nasty fighting in cities and towns.
And is it fair to say that Ukraine is doing well on that digital front as well, in terms of the information war and just getting their message, their story out?
They've been surprisingly brilliant. And that is where there is almost a touch of genius about Volodymyr Zelensky. As we talked about, like you, the camera loves him, he loves the camera, and he's very good at getting the message out. And he is extremely worried. This is what he's telling his generals. If we don't show we're on the front foot and we can survive, then we're in trouble. And it's finally balanced over these next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, so that's what we're seeing at the moment, and that's the philosophy behind this counteroffensive, and that will be to mess up logistics for the Russians, cut bridges, cut transportation for them.
And ensure they have an opening to the Black Sea, because with Mykolaiv and Kherson, it means that they've protected Odessa and its 2 ports. There is a very gritty, practical side to this as well.
Well, what's the latest on this nuclear power plant, which we think that the Russians hold, and they may be storing arms, ammunition at whatever? What have you heard there?
Well, what we need to know is what the IEA inspectors, if they get in, can really tell us. The back briefing last week is the real concern was the fuel rods. They have to be cooled, and the Russians interdicting the electricity supply meant that water wasn't being pumped in to cool the rods. By the way, it's a very, very different circumstance from the great disaster that attended the beginning of Gorbachev's reign at Chernobyl. Chernobyl blew up owing to a mistake and bad practice into the atmosphere. That isn't quite on the cards at the moment, but an explosion in the storage facilities is a big worry.
Just when we thought it couldn't get any worse in the world, there we go, we've got that fear as well. Thank you, Robert Fox. Really appreciate your take. Robert's the defence editor of the Evening Standard. Thank you very much indeed.